In this video, I would like to do a reading of Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. I may not be able to make it all the way through in a 15-minute time period, but I want to look at the Greek, look at the Hebrew, and look at the Latin, do grammar, and make a commentary as I do it. It's the introductory verses that set the stage for the entire book. Palumeros kai palutrapos palaichataas lalesas tois patrasen en tois prophetais. In many parts and in many ways, God of old, having spoken to the fathers, or spoke to the fathers in the prophets. I guess we could render it having spoken to the fathers in the prophets. Notice the two adverbs beginning here, palumeros and palutrapos, with the os ending, in many parts and in many ways. God of old, having spoken to the fathers. Lalesas is from laleo. It's the aorist participle, nominative, masculine, singular, from laleo. Having spoken to the fathers in the prophets. In takes the dative case, and tois prophetais is plural from prophetes, for prophet. The Hebrew reads, Ha Elohim asher diber mekedem pa'amim rabot uvafanim shonim el avotenu biyad ha-nevaim diber elenu be'acharit hayamim ha'ela biyad beno. God, which spoke formerly in former times, in many ways, and also in many parts, I should say, in many ways, many faces, sort of interesting the way it's translated here. In these last days, he's spoken to us. In other words, let me just go back. Pa'amim rabot uvefanim shonim el avotenu, which he spoke to the fathers, biyad ha-nevi'im diber elenu, by the hand of the prophets, spoke unto us, be'acharit hayamim ha'ela, in these last days, biyad beno, by his son. Notice here just a couple things. Diber, ha-Elohim asher diber, is a cow perfect third masculine, is a PL, perfect third masculine singular from the root davar, in former times, and in different ways unto our fathers, by the hand of the prophets spoke, another PL stem, third masculine singular, diber, unto us in these last days, literally by the hand of his son, or by his son. And the Latin reads, multifarium et multis modis olem Deus locutus patribus in prophetis. In many ways, or many parts, I should say, in many manners or many ways, God of old, having spoken to the fathers, perfect passive participial form, in the prophets, now in these last days, spoke to us in the Son. Let me just go on with the Greek then. Ep eskatu ton hemeron tuton, elalesin hemen in huio, spoke to us in the Son. Han etheken tleranaman panton, dihukai apoiesin tus ionos. In these last of days, he spoke to us in the Son. Elale sin again is from laleo. It's the aorist indicative active third person singular from laleo. He spoke to us in the Son, whom Here we have the relative pronoun ethakin. It's the accusative singular of the relative pronoun whom. Ethakin, he made heir of all things. Ethakin is the aorist indicative active third person singular from tithemi, whom he made heir of all things. Dihu kai apoiesin tu sayuna, through whom also he made the ages. Looking at the universe here. Apoiesin is from poieo. It is the aorist indicative active third person singular from poieo. So through whom also he made the worlds or the ages. And I had already read that in the Hebrew. He spoke to us by the hand of the prophet. In these after days, by the hand of his son, or through his son. And then Asher Netano, just a second. Yeah. Asher Netano leyoresh ko vegam asa beyado et ha'olamim is the Hebrew, which would read, which he has given him to be the heir of all. Natanu is from Natan. It's the cow perfect third masculine singular from Natan, with the O, the pronominal suffix, third masculine singular, which he gave him to be the heir or to inherit. I'm understanding Yoresh here is from Yarash, to inherit, a cow participle masculine singular from Yarash, to be the heir, inherit all, and indeed he has made by his hand the olamim, the world. Asa is a cow perfect third masculine singular from the root asa. And so we're looking at 7 things that he has done here. And so looking then at the Latin, quim constituit heredem universorum, whom he constituted heir of all things, per quim facit et saecula, by whom he made the ages or the world in saecula. Then we move on to verse 3. So he's the creator of the universe, or the age, or the actually, I think the Hebrew or the Greek here, Ionos, is simply looking at the universe that Jesus created. Then we move on in verse 3. Has on apaugas ma tes doxes kai karater tes kupastasa os autu. Feron tapanta to clemati tes dunama os autu, katharisman ton harmartion poiesamenas akathesin in doxia tes megalosunes in hupselois. Bearing all things. Let me go back at the beginning. Who, being the radiance of the glory and the exact stamp of his essence. Who being, on is a participle, present active participle, nominative masculine singular from ami, who being the radiance, the effulgence of his glory. We see the glory of God in Jesus, and the exact stamp, characterites hypostasos, the exact stamp of his essence. He is totally divine. Feron te tapanta to clemati tes dunama osautu, bearing all things by the word of his power. Feron is another present participle, nominative masculine singular from pharaoh. So bearing all things by the word of his power, katharisman ton harmartion poiesamenos, a purification of sin, having made himself. This is from poieo. It's the aorist middle participle nominative masculine singular from poieo, having made a purging of sins, ekot the sin in dexia tes megalosunes in hupselois. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Akathe sin is your aorist indicative active third person singular from kathidzo, to set down. And then looking at the Hebrew, uh, the Hu, Zohar Kebodo, he is the effulgence or the radiance, uh, who being the radiance Kebodo of his glory, Betzelem Yeshuto, and the exact stamp of his essence, Venose Ho Bidvar Gevurato, and bearing all things by the word of his majesty or power. Nose is the cow participle masculine singular from Nasa, and bearing all things by the word of his power. The Achere Asoto, and bearing all things by the word of his uh, power. And then we go on, uh, being the radiance of the glory, uh, asoto ben nafsho. In other words, he radiates, bears all things, and is the radiation of his glory in his own soul. Uh, Tahurat chatotenu, that is a bearing, uh, making a purification, tahurat chatotenu, of our covenant breaking or of our sins. Having made a purification of our sins, yashav liminim, or limin, excuse me, hagedolah, he sat down on the right side of the majesty Bameromim, on the majesty on high. Again, Yashab here is the cow perfect third masculine singular from the root Yashab. He sat down. So it's very close to the Hebrew or to the Greek, bearing all things by the word of his power, having made a purging of sins, he sat down on the right side of the majesty on high. The Latin then reads, Qui cum sed splendor gloria, being the splendor of his glory, who is the splendor of his glory, et figura substantiae eius, the stamp of his essence, et portet omnia verbo virtutis sua, and bearing all things by his powerful word, and he bears all things, present indicative active third person singular here in portet. Purgatione peccatorum facta, having made a purging of sins, conceded, he set down, perfect here, ad dexterum majestatis in excelsis. He sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. So what we're learning here, just by way of summary, are 7 things that Jesus did. He starts out by saying, in many parts and in many ways, God spoke to the fathers variantly, sometimes through visions, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through direct speech. And the fathers, he spoke in the prophets. And then in these last days, and we're living in the last days from the first century on, he has spoken to us in the Son, whom he did, who basically had, there's 7 things about the Son. And this takes us back to Psalm 2. You are my son. Bani ata ani hayom niliticha. You are my son. This day have I begotten you. So he spoke in the Son, whom he placed heir of all things. Jesus is heir of all things, through whom he made the ages. He is the creator of the world. Kaiapoies tu ionos. He is the one who made the universe, I think is ionos here, who being the radiance of the glory, number three, he apaugasma, he radiates. He's the effulgence of the glory of God's kavod, of his doxa, and being the exact stamp of his essence. Karakter means exact stamp. In other words, he's fully deity, I think the writer of Hebrews is saying. And then next, he bears all things along, history along, the universe he holds together by just speaking, bearing all things along by his powerful word, having made himself a purging of sins, a removal of sins, a kasaresmanton harmartion. He did that himself in this aorist middle participial form. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Psalm 110 is fulfilled here. Shev lemini adashilo yavecha hadom leravlecha, set at my right side until I make your enemies the footstool of your feet. The writer of Hebrews is quoting that Jesus Christ is now seated at the right side in the place of honor as a result of his ascension. So, 7 things are said about Jesus Christ in these last days. Last days meaning from the time that Christ is incarnation unto today. So we've been in the last days. We could say we're maybe in the last of the last days today. But he goes on and says, he's heir of all things. Secondly, he's the creator, the one who made the worlds, the universe. He is, number 3, he's the radiation, or I like the word effulgence of the glory. Number 4, he's the exact stamp of the very essence of God. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father, Jesus said. Number 5, he carries all things along by just speaking, by his powerful word. And number 6, having made a purification of sins, he now, number 7, is seated at the right hand of the Majesty on high. I often get amused when I read this. I'm reminded of Jesus bearing all things by just speaking. When I was about in the 9th grade, we had a mover coming to the house, and he had had one too much to drink that night. And I said, as a naive, 9th grader, do you think you could pick my dad and put him above your head? He said, no problem. We went over and picked up my dad and did a press above his head. And my dad was glowering at me. I knew I was in trouble after that happened. But at any rate, I thought that was amazing. But Jesus just speaks, and everything is held together. So these 7 things the writer of Hebrews wants us to know about Jesus Christ so that we can now move into the book and begin to see step by step how he develops the greatness of Jesus Christ.